Okay, so welcome to the session on and for online people too, welcome to this session on the importance of EDI for the future of research software. So thank you very much to Cairo for that introduction and the reminder of the code of conduct. And just to extend that a little bit for this session, within this room, there'll be a mixture of lived and learned experience. So just to acknowledge that we're creating that space for sort of creating an understanding within the community, a space for growth within this session. Also, Carolin's put a link to Slido in the Slack channel. So you're very welcome to click on that. We have our prepared questions, but we also have a space for your questions to come through as well, whether you're online or in person. I don't think I introduced myself. No, so I'm Anise Banerjee. I'm part of the SSI team. And I lead the Inclusive RSC project, which I've been speaking to some of you about already. And I'll now hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Pauline. And just a reminder with the mics, you have to hold them really close, almost like pointing onto your nose for them to work well. So don't worry if they slip. But if you'd like to say something about your connection to RSC, the RSC space, and your connection to EDI as well.
Hello, my name is Pauline Canada. I'm a second year PhD student at the University of Manchester. Good stuff. That's my just sort of plan. In terms of RSC, I'm RSC adjacent. I run a community of bioinformaticians back in Kenya with the bioinformatics initiative, and that's when I got introduced to research software engineering. So it's kind of been trying to get that information out there in the community because bioinformaticians form a big part of individuals who would identify as RSCs in Kenya. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Eli Chadwick. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I'm a senior research software engineer at the University of Manchester. My main job is working on metadata tools and specifications, and I also do a lot of things on the side through the SSI and the RSC Society. So I'm an SSI fellow from 2021 cohort, and since then I've been studying accessibility a lot, which I got into after becoming disabled myself and needing to use assistive technology and discovering that things got really hard suddenly. And I'm trying to slowly improve accessibility awareness in research software, and recently started a meetup for RSCs with an interest in disability and accessibility. I'm also openly and joyously trans, even at the moment, and yeah, that's me.
Good morning, I'm Ella Kay. I'm a research software engineer at the University of Warwick, where I work with Heather Turner on her EP SRC fellowship project around sustainability and EDI in the R project. I'm an SSI fellow in this current 2021 cohort. Sorry, no, it's not 2021. In this current 2025 cohort. I also run Rainbow R, which is a community for LGBTQ+ folks who code in R. And my SSI fellowship is around nurturing the Rainbow R community and the sustainability of that community overall. And I have also been part of the Inclusive RSC project, working with Anita and Pauline and Ruth, who we had from yesterday. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And to bring in Malvika now.
Hi, everyone. I'm the big floating head. Welcome to my living room. I'm Malvika Sharan. I am one of the directors for Open Life Science, OLS, and a project lead for the Turing Way, which is which has been so far part of the Alan Turing Institute, where I'm spending one more month as a senior researcher. I have been working in open science for over a decade, and I find myself quite privileged in being in this panel, as I've been thinking a lot about the discussions we're going to have, and I feel like I cannot tell where my own thoughts and ideas start and where I have learned from the communities I've had the chance to work with. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'll be there tomorrow. If you're there, I'd love to catch up. Back to you, Anita.
Malvika. Okay, so thanks for your introductions. We'll go on to our first question. So Ella, if we could start with you, and just a reminder, you really have to hold those microphones close. Yeah. Okay. So we have community-oriented spaces and organisations in RSC, such as the SSI, the Turing Way, the Carpentries, and others. So what do you see as the role of community-oriented spaces and organisations in shaping the future of EDI in the research software ecosystem?
Thank you very much. I have a number of thoughts on this, and I'm going to address them at various different levels. So the role of community for individuals, for smaller communities or sub-communities within broader communities, and then like the society at large. So starting with individuals, I think I think, and what many people think is a recognised benefit of community is a sense of belonging that community can give to people. And when people feel like they belong somewhere, they are more likely to want to contribute to that space in which they belong. So I know, for example, just being here at the SSI at CW25, I just feel like such a buzz and sense of belonging from being here that it makes me really keen to stay part of the RSC community and contribute in that way. And I know Rainbow R provides that sense of belonging for a lot of people within the R community as well. And with that, these kind of communities can provide a space and support for those who might not feel like they necessarily have software skills. And we see this in Rainbow R. A lot of people feel like they like it using R, but they don't necessarily see themselves as software people or developers. And having a supportive space and friendly space can help build confidence and give people a sense of identity as a software person as well. And then more formally than that, communities can provide networking opportunities, mentorship opportunities, skills sharing and knowledge exchange, all of which can bolster individuals when contributing to software more generally. Communities can also provide accessible on-ramps. So, for example, I started my journey in R or into the R community largely through the R Ladies community. I think that having what felt like a safe space and somewhere where I knew I had things in common with other people there was a more welcoming way into R than the R community than like the broader community. And I know other people feel that way as well. But once people are in these sub-communities and gaining confidence and meeting people and networking in this way, it also provides a route to contributing to the large community as a whole. For example, we've had at least 6 people from Rainbow R who have gone on to contribute to our developer days and make contributions to base R through that Rainbow R to R contributor route. Communities for individuals can also provide opportunities to discuss challenges and get advice without fear of repercussion. And if people feel well supported, then that will hopefully lead to them potentially, if they have frustrations that would otherwise lead them to want to quit a community or quit software development, say, then having opportunities to discuss those and get advice can potentially lead to people staying on in software. And communities can also provide opportunities to promote underrepresented folk who can go on to advocate for change. In terms of the broader community, I want to quote from Hadley Wickham. So if anybody works with R, probably be familiar with the name Hadley Wickham. He is responsible for a very popular suite of packages known as the Tidyverse. And he recently published a long blog post reflecting on his personal history of the tidyverse and how it came to be developed and the art community around it. And he wrote, referring to a period of sort of in around like 2018 or so. The art community on Twitter became known for its supportive and welcoming atmosphere, standing in marked contrast to the less friendly environments found in other technical communities. I believe a big part of this is due to the diversity of our users, which has been tremendously boosted thanks to groups like Our Ladies, Minorities in Art, and Rainbow Art. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. When a community is welcoming to people from underrepresented groups, the broader community becomes welcoming and friendly and open to everybody. It becomes a broadly much more pleasant community to be part of. And then at a sort of societal level, communities can advocate for change and they have a voice to do that. I'm sure Malvika will say more about the Turing Way, but I thought of that as an example of driving cultural change. And communities also have a collective voice and they're more powerful together. And Kirsty mentioned a couple of examples of this yesterday. Again, I'm going to take an example from the art community around statements released in these challenging times. So Kirsty mentioned the bravery of Our Ladies Plus, or Our Ladies and then rebranding to Our Ladies Plus. And a statement from the Carpentries, there was also a very powerful statement from our open side. So communities as a whole, when they can come together and advocate for change, really help.
Malvika, your response.
Yeah, so I will be probably emphasizing a lot of things Ella has already said, but I thought of kind of acknowledging that communities have always been crucial in different spaces for enabling collective action and catalyzing change. And that's what Ella has actually given a lot of example about. And these are organized and supported spaces for people to join, relate to each other's human experiences, and together work towards not just discussing, but also dismantling shared challenges. In research and software ecosystem, we have the privilege to be both part of the global communities around specific domain, for example, open source, open science initiative that Ella already named, including SSI Network, OLS, Turing Way, Carpentry, Society of RSC, but also build local networks that provide local representation and elevate local needs. For example, local chapters built by RSC Asia Association, Australia and Africa, and even networks that are connected to bigger networks. These are very important to acknowledge that it's not just about building global communities, but empowering local leaders to lead on the efforts that's really meaningful for them. These kinds of communities will always remain important, not just today. It has always been important. It will continue to be important in the future for the human-centric collaboration and bringing societal aspects in the forefront. Of course, in the institutions, we work on technology, but often we don't have the opportunity to unpack our personal experiences, which is what the communities like the ones that we are naming are providing us. It is important to also build, alongside innovative technology and infrastructure, understanding and acknowledgement for power structure, accessibility, and systemic injustice that can neither be fixed quickly nor by individuals alone. Through participation in communities like these, we learn to build humility and accept that we have limited knowledge alone. Only by working with other people, valuing differences in diverse communities, we can build strong network support and solutions that are as broadly useful as possible. More specifically, we have the opportunity to amplify and elevate diverse voices and leaders. For example, that already Ella has mentioned in the Turing Way, OLS, Our Ladies Plus, and Rainbow R, we are neither subtle at putting EDI at the forefront, and we are not even creating a separate category for EDI. We are putting these ideas in the front and center. You can't really separate EDI from the core work that we do. And we're not known for improving EDI. We're known for improving technology. We're known for advancing practices and providing spaces around coding and programming and data science and so on. What we are also very good at, that we all continue to do, is the transparent documentation, organized community management, investment towards community policies and guidelines, and variety of initiatives, which may look like frivolous events, but they are so important for connecting people, allowing them to build projects and engagement that they need. We have also been operationalizing and normalizing these EDI approaches, where people can directly influence where the community will go next, so which is not always possible at the institution level. I wanted also to acknowledge that in commercial spaces, and I'm not going to call institution as commercial spaces, but you can if you want to. By definition, these places are transactional. We pay for services or we get paid for the services we provide. Whereas in communities, we are part of the process, and the process may not be perfect, but we have the vested interest in improving those for ourselves and the people like us. Participation in open science communities have personally exposed me to inclusive events and network building approaches that even after a decade I've been applying in my own work. I want to acknowledge the carpentries where, of course, we learned how to be inclusive in our teaching or apply co-development practices on GitHub, but it has also helped normalize these practices in the work we do, in the teams we build, in the communities we build, and realize that we have something that we can offer, not just, these helpless consumer to what we are being offered. I also want to say that people, even with enormous privilege and influence, cannot work alone or advocate for policy change or investment, especially towards systemic barriers to EDI. So, for example, groups like Hidden Ref or SSI Fellow Networks or working group within different communities that we work in, they allow us to have more systemic changes in a way which is combined and not isolated. I don't think professions like RSE could have been recognized at the national or international level if there was one person entering the office and announcing that this is what I need. We do need people to have these places where we can come back and have these conversations and advance it. And also acknowledge that my generation is different from future generation and different from past generation. And if I don't express my needs right now, my needs will not be fulfilled. And these communities are those spaces to continuously come in and talk about it. Kirsty already mentioned a lot of really incredible things, but I wanted to emphasize this first talk that she gave, is the incremental progress is still a progress, and we cannot often recognize the progress if we are individually witnessing it. But if we have resilient and strong communities that allow us to be part of something that previous generation has brought to us and the future generation will see, we can document these progress and we can show that there is value in combined effort. RSE movement at scale should be seen as a guiding example for building and carrying forward momentum for desired change and sustaining it through network approach, as long as we need to normalize it. Like, people should completely forget in future that there was a life without these roles. Beyond networking, communities are also important for respectful dialogue and disagreement, through which we can call out potential bias and harm in our work, and improve our ecosystem. Diverse communities where both technical expertise and human experiences are equally valued, we have the opportunity to co-design something that benefits our society as a whole. My personal guiding principle has been, for any space and workspace, is to acknowledge that all systems have problems and all systems have flaws, but it's impossible to be part of a system that does not acknowledge those problems, or worse, if they actively downplay or shut down people from raising concern. So when we are building communities and applying these practices in our communities, we need to especially speak up and support other people to speak up, ideas that will shape our EDI values. So to finish, EDI is not just a matter of social justice. It is, of course, but it is also an investment for future of research itself. By protecting those people who are working to build a more equitable system, and by dismantling the legacy of exclusion, we need to make sure the research communities can drive innovation that benefits our society.
Yeah. Thank you, Malvika and Ella, for your comprehensive answers, but also contextualizing them so much in the RSC space, so we can clearly see how that works and how that could work. Is there anything you would like to add, if you'd like to do that?
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Polly, can I just sort of adapt that question a little bit for you? So how can these community organisations support the inclusion of international RSCs, researchers and PhD students? What are your thoughts around community organisations and our international OE?
So many of these communities within international spaces where terms like research software engineering get introduced. So, for example, RSC is a relatively new term in Kenya, for example. A few years ago, it was open science, and through like aggressive outreach, open science now became more apparent and more talked about in Kenya. So communities allowed that to happen. So RSC is a new term, and to communities, we get to do aggressive outreach and get that term out there to be known. To communities also is how we get funding to be able to do these outreach events. We are able to collaborate with different communities, get small grants to be able to go to physically to these universities and introduce the terms, get funding to hold different types of events. So communities also open up opportunities to funding and collaboration. And also many of these things for international like PhD students, most of us from international countries, we come here under scholarships, and we're not obligated by any of these scholarships to do any of these things. Funding is 3 years, and it's just 3 years. So to communities is where you get to interact with different individuals who actually help you get out of that space of just here to do the work and write my thesis and go back home, something like that. We get to get introduced to different job opportunities, expand our minds in terms of the projects that we're doing, meet people who are willing to host us for events and different types of opportunities that we will be able to carry forward after the PhD journey. We just get introduced to a different, entirely different world that is, and we get to think about more than just PhD and training and get introduced to new industries as well.
Great, thanks for bringing that perspective in, which may be quite different for some of us that have never had that experience, and the sort of the constraints and the opportunities around that. Okay, so coming to you, Malvika, again, and Estella, you wanted to respond at all to the conversations, or have to move on? So, Malvika, from a different kind of international perspective, and I know there have been discussions around this already, and Kirsty brought it in, but considering the active pushback against EDI in the US at the moment, how can the RSE community become clearer or even clearer about our commitment to EDI in the face of this pushback? And what are the potential consequences for the future of research software and therefore research if we don't?
I have to say that it's going to be a bit rambly answer, because of course we don't all have the right answer, because unfortunately the narrative in USA is affecting and reinforcing narrative worldwide, and media isn't helping us, journalism isn't always helping us. The active pushback against EDI, and especially the struggle of minority group, calls for deep systemic commitment to EDI from all of us, wherever we are, with whatever leverage, whatever privilege we can leverage, especially if we are outside the US. This isn't just a matter of fairness. Again, it's fundamental to building a very a just and resilient research software ecosystem. We all need to take individual responsibility to educate ourselves as much as we can. I know that it's a lot of re-educating every single day, but unfortunately we have to, and we are all in this space trying to do that. So definitely encourage people to engage with that conversation, because it's important to understand that pushback isn't affecting everyone equally, and largely it is affecting people who are historically and systematically marginalized, especially people who are from racial, ethnic minorities, women, LGBTQ individuals, people with disability, immigrants, and others. They are continuing to bearing the brunt of these regression. And we need to make sure that we call out hostility, um, inaccessibility, or invalidation of their experiences where we are. From international perspective, particularly for those who are outside the immediate political climate of US, we hold some degree of privilege. Either our institution or professional space have some commitment to EDI, or if we are not sure, we have mentioned these communities that are committed to EDI, and they provide us some social framework. Even if we don't have any privilege at all, we need to find and gather in safe spaces and communities where we can identify what relative privilege we have that we can use to actively support our communities and colleagues who are facing this resistance. Initiative we spoke about, like the Carpentries, OLS, RC community, Our Ladies, Our Open Side, Rainbow R, they all have deep commitment to community. And they will become even more important for holding these spaces for the conversation to happen. And we need to engage with those spaces actively. So if you feel like you've not been part of these conversation yet, I think you're missing out. We've been having these dialogue in these communities for months and months, and we are also monitoring as much as we can and sharing knowledge from wherever we are able to around how we can address this. To become very, very clear about the commitment itself, I think I came up with 4 specific ideas that we have seen these communities apply. One, Ella already talked about issuing clear and unequivocal statement of solidarity. Organizations like the Carpentries have already done it. Our Ladies Plus have already done it. A lot of other communities who feel safe and that they just don't think they have option not to have these statements out there. They have explicitly acknowledged the challenge faced by those in US, and they have provided visible demonstration for support to reinforce the importance of EDI. The second is amplifying voices of marginalized groups. Um, the point around that single stories are dangerous. We need to have multiple stories being highlighted, have more opportunities for people to share their experiences. If they are not able to share their experiences openly, have anonymous spaces for their voices to be heard, and most importantly, not silenced. Third is offering practical support and resource. Pauline already talked about some of those, like mentoring programs, especially targeted to marginalized members, can help them feel safe and find spaces where they can identify future support that they need. The final is highlighting and celebrating diversity in EDI. Even if we are unable to do anything more actively, we should not stop doing what we already do in EDI. We need to showcase excellent work of individuals from diverse backgrounds, communicate them through concrete examples and data, and reinforce the value and necessity of EDI in driving excellence in research. The minimum responsibility each of us can take is to actively counter misinformation and divisive rhetoric around EDI by highlighting evidence-based benefits of diversity and inclusivity in workspace. We might not be able to change everyone's mind, even with data, but we have to at least try. We have to at least provide the support for people who are fighting alone. There is a power in numbers and multiple stories. I will um, give a few points around what if we don't do this. If we fail to do this, we will lose a lot of people. We will lose connections and support that communities draw from working with us in international space, in open science spaces. We will most dangerously erode ethical principle. When we undermine EDI, we also undermine the importance of those aspects in building technology. We can damage international collaboration. We can damage the trust that we have built by working in our communities over the years. And we can set a very dangerous precedent if we fail to be part of EDI movement now, and we think that the future proofing means to drop our commitment to EDIA. we are regressing. We are undoing a lot of progress that we have done, and we are undermining credibility of research in, standing the test of time. Most importantly, I think we all need to have hope that this is momentary, that this will change. No movement is without possible without hope. I've been reading Angela Davis a lot to keep myself sane. We need to support and protect our community where we can. We need to be bold if we are able to. If we are not able to be bold, we need to create safe spaces. I'll stop there, Anita.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Malvika. And yeah, although you said you were going to ramble, you're actually incredibly clear about some of the things we can do to keep moving forward under the current political circumstances and how important that is. I don't know if any of the panel would like to add to that, if there's something you'd like to draw out or whatever.
Thanks, Malvika. That was an extraordinarily good answer. And I prepared some notes on this, and you have covered pretty much everything I wanted to say, and much more besides. But I think one thing that has been on my mind a lot is that as somebody who works in EDI, it's easy to take it for granted that EDI is an unequivocally good thing, and to feel dismay or frustration or anger when others don't share that view. But I do think it is also important to remember that other people have different viewpoints and priorities. And we're talking about what's happening in the US and the pushback there, and in particular, might be tempting to think, okay, well, that's like the MAGA Republicans in the US, but it's not just there. It's in the UK. It's happening all over, and that's the most in-your-face examples, perhaps, that I've heard discussions in my own department that have been challenging. I think it's important to attempt to depoliticize a lot of these conversations and to stay engaged in nuanced discussion. Malvika talked about education, like re-educating ourselves and educating others as well. So yeah, and also I don't know, I get in a bit of a muddle with this sometimes, because on the one hand, want to be like, unequivocally, EDI is a good thing, and we've got to kind of stress that and fight it on that front.
Sorry.
But also perhaps moving the language away from EDI can be helpful too sometimes, because it has become so politicized. And maybe we can engage in discussions around using a different language around like fairness or talent retention, and also around like the consequences of it as well. So, for example, I know some of the discussion in my department has been around, oh, well, if we have to focus on EDI stuff, then we're not going to be focusing on our research. And actually to be saying, well, diverse teams produce better research and better software, and that these things don't, they're not in polarization, they actually go hand in hand. So to focus on the issues at stake, which is that EDI really is good for research software, and to stress that. Yeah, I think pretty much everything else I had written down here, Malvika talked about.
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing in that, that interesting discussion on how we approach the subjects and, priorities, and how that plays out in the research software space, and how that can be a challenge, can't it? When it's talking about you and your lived experience.
It gets exhausting.
It gets exhausting. It does. Yeah. 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 Just a reminder with the microphones, they need to be super close.
So for and EDIA is so for small communities and new conversations, like again, this is for engineering relatively new term to many of these international communities, and that EDIA as much as we don't want it to be the case. That's where funding to be able to do some of to spread that word is where that comes from. So understanding that triple effects, our governments don't know the term RSE, they're very disconnected from this very grassroots community in town. So we can't go to them to ask for funding to be able to champion some of these conversations. And it's been nice to see big communities and advocating for ripple effect you'll be seeing in terms of EDAs where funding comes in. So having conversations with the bigger community in terms of, okay, so if this is what is going to change, then you're going to have to start addressing things like this to be able to continue getting funding, and so that that gap doesn't increase, because if things continue going the way they are going, one of the effects is that we won't be able to champion conversations like RSE and having internationals join, obviously, communities. Yeah, that we continue creating a big and because funding has stopped, so that conversation has also stopped.
Yes, it's that with the small international communities where RSE isn't so known, that sort of diversity route collaboration is helping promote RSE within those. And if EDI is sort of shut down internationally, that funding route will cease to exist, and then that has a consequence internationally for RSE then. Should we move on to the next question? Yeah. Okay. So thinking a little bit more around open source software, and coming to you on this, Eli. In what ways could open source software support, there's too many S's there, wasn't there? In what ways could open source software support underrepresented groups in the future? Are there any barriers that need to be overcome?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways in which I could come at this question. There's a focus on the users of open source software, or on developers that are currently developing open source software, or people that are looking to get into development of open source software. I'm going to focus on the user side of things, if we haven't talked about that yet. I think one of the major things that we can improve on collectively is the accessibility of our open source software. This is, and when I'm talking about that, I'm meaning it not in the fair sense that we often talk about fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. I'm talking about accessibility for disabled users, disabled research software engineers and researchers in particular. And while disabled people are the focus of the accessibility work, it is something that benefits everyone. The point of accessibility is to make sure that people are empowered, can be independent, and will not be frustrated by something that is poorly designed or implemented. Like that's a benefit for everybody. And I think a major barrier to getting there is a lack of awareness, firstly, of the barriers that disabled people can face when trying to access open source software or any software. Many of us in this field of research software engineering in particular are self-taught. And when you're self-taught, this can be a subject that you miss entirely by accident unless you come into contact with it directly. And that's what happened to me. I didn't know anything about accessibility, and then I started using user-assisted tech. And then I learned a lot about accessibility very quickly, and I became rapidly very interested in it. And yeah, I think that's an area we can improve on. I think we need more resources for learning how to develop accessible software targeted at research software engineers. I think we need to do more like user testing, interaction with our users. There was a great lightning talk about this yesterday, and that kind of conversation between the users of our software and the developers of our software, and bringing in conversations about how people are using the software earlier on in the development process, rather than developing a whole backend and then throwing on a front end at the last minute and saying, this works, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's checking my notes. Yeah, I think that's what I had to say about that. Obviously, there's other things we can do as well, but that's what I'm focused on.
I'm just wondering, you spoke about wanting more resources for research software engineers so they can understand how to do their job considering accessibility. Are there any current resources? Is that a complete gap or?
So there's a lot of resources for specifically developing like web applications. So if you develop web applications, there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Those are also very useful if, for things like writing training material or documentation, because they're just about all the kind of content you can access on the web. There is a bit less guidance around GUIs that aren't web-based. Some of the web guidelines can apply to non-web GUIs, but I think that's a bit of a gap. And similarly, command line interfaces, there's not as much guidance there either.
Yeah, I think it's sort of something interesting to think about, the conversations around getting clear around the competencies for RSEs and the career path, and there's sort of an understanding of accessibility in there at any point, I wonder, because you say a lot of people are self-taught programmers, aren't they? So
yeah, I would agree. I would like to see this become part of our competencies frameworks that are being developed at the moment. I would like to see it incorporated into the kinds of training that we're giving to early career researchers in like things like software carpentry. But also there's like an intermediate level like research software engineering course that exists that I would love to see have some accessibility material included into it. And then they could be developed like an accessibility carpentry style material itself. I'd be interested in working on that, but I can't do it by myself. So if you'd like to be involved, yeah, let me know.
yeah, some great ideas there. Yeah, and again, it takes the time and the energy to do all this, doesn't it? Pauline, do you want to bring anything in from your perspective around open source software, how that could be important in the future for international communities, international PhD students? Your experience of open source software?
Creating tech that is for software that is can work in places where internet is a bit low, find it a problem. These have been conversations around in open source communities back home, and translation in the local languages. And I know this has been started, which has it's pretty amazing. It allows you to see and also do quite a lot of things. The communities, like there's a Swahili programming language developed by a Tanzanian company, which is pretty interesting. That is already conversations around development of this software. Yeah, that's it. I'm not very well fast with OSS.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a interesting perspectives here, and maybe we had an experience this morning when Edgy Rome came down of a little bit of a taste of suddenly we can't get access to the things that we're used to, and how would we work if that was a regular occurrence alongside power cuts? No, yeah. Okay, so we're running out of time a little bit for our own questions. I've just got one more here for Eli. Yeah, moving from thinking about organizations maybe to individuals, and we've touched on this anyway. Yeah, thinking about RSCs or people who are RSC adjacent, and then you're doing EDIA work as well because you feel that's important. And you're looking to progress your career. So how does doing EDIA work interact with your career progression? as an RSC, if you'd like to say something around that.
Yeah, there's so many things. I could turn this, my notes are a complete mess. But basically, doing this work has made me a better research software engineer. Like, that's very clear to me. By considering the needs of the people that use my software, I'm able to write better software. By considering the needs of the people who are attending the events that I run, I have become a much better event planner. I'm so aggressively organized about everything, because I really am focused on making sure everyone is getting what they need. By thinking about the language that I'm using and whether what I say is understandable by as many people as possible, I've become a much better communicator. I have to take quite a long time sometimes to think about what words I'm going to use to articulate myself. But I've found that thinking about the audience that I'm serving has helped a lot with that process. I think the community engagement skills that I've picked up through EDIA work in particular have helped me a lot as I'm starting to develop a community focused around the technical product that I work on. I've done way more of that work than I was expecting to do when I was hired as a research software engineer into my current role. But I really enjoy it. I think there are so many opportunities to lead work in this space, whether it's running meetups or starting projects, like community projects, developing new material, all these things give you so many opportunities to develop leadership skills, build your own confidence, and all of those things make you more employable. I don't know if being more employable is necessarily the end goal, but it's definitely a benefit. You meet so many fantastic people doing this work who support you and inspire you and encourage you, and help you to find new opportunities when you're ready to move on. And something that isn't directly tied to your employability necessarily, but it's an important part of your career and your career development, in my opinion, is the job satisfaction. Doing this work is really rewarding. It's exhausting, but it's really rewarding, and it's fun, and you get to contribute to change in your community. You get to give and receive feedback and watch the community change and feed into that process. And it's so satisfying to watch it happen. And I think that's the highlight of it for me.
Yeah, I appreciate you articulating so clearly from your experience what's getting involved in EDI, how that strengthened you as a research software engineer. Just to ask, do you think you're able to articulate that? Do you think that if people can articulate that, that will support career progression? That's you as an individual doing the work. Is there something we need to change in the structures, looking at structural change, so that that can feed into career progression? I know I've jumped that question on you at the last minute.
Yeah, I think like this kind of work is under-recognized and underappreciated. It's seen as something you're doing like on the side, and it's not important to your regular work, when in fact it's like intrinsically tied to it. I can't separate really the EDIA bits from everything else that I do. It's all tied together. And I think it's, as Ella said earlier, I've forgotten the exact words. But some people think that if you're doing EDIA work, you're not doing your regular work. And that, or if you're doing EDIA, if you're improving EDIA, you're not improving research. And that's not true. And we need to make sure people understand that that isn't true. We need to recognize this kind of work in the same way as we recognize like technical progression. And
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything that the panel would like to add, Malvika or Ella? No? Okay. So we'll move on to some of our questions here. Now, I'm aware that our panelists don't have expertise in all areas of EDI, so it may be that as a group, you know, as a community, you can probably answer some of these questions, but as the people up here, maybe we can't ask them all. And I also might pick and choose the questions a little bit, because again, our panelists do have EDI expertise, but they're not social scientists stood up here speaking from that perspective. So I'm going to pick my questions, and I'm happy for you to talk to me about that afterwards. So I don't know if anybody here has ideas on, when teaching research software to undergraduates, are there some effective ways to be more inclusive towards neurodivergent students? They're curious about teaching practices and assessment. So I'm not sure what your experience as a group are around teaching and training, and if you've thought about that inclusivity and accessibility for neurodivergence. I'm not expecting you to, but if somebody would like to answer that. It's okay, we don't.
We can try and formulate some thoughts. I think having access in advance to the training material. So like, for example, the carpentries material, it's openly available online. You can just go and find it and look through it at your own pace. I think that's very useful. Having lots of information up front about the event, and this goes not just for training events, but also for conferences, about the structure of the day, what the plan is, you know, if there's when the breaks are, or who's going to be teaching, who you need to ask if you need accommodations, asking for accommodation up front, asking people to share if they need any accommodations with you up front, and also, you know, doing as much as you can to control the space that you're holding your event in. So if you're in a physical space, doing as much as you can to make sure that it's physically accessible, that there's not too much background noise, that there are, you know, not as avoid distraction, and also make your events hybrid if you can. It's extra work, but it means that a greater range of people can access your events in the way that suits them best.
Yeah, I mean, that very much reflects when I work with students who are neurodivergent on the Inclusive RSC project. Those very much reflect the requests that they come to me with at the start of the project, that if we're going to do something in a session, a meeting together, I send them an agenda beforehand, I send them materials beforehand so that they can take things in at their own pace. And a request that I've also had multiple times is afterwards, I send them an email stating clearly what the requests were at the end and what was agreed with, so that the sort of sometimes muddled conversations within the session are then laid out clearly for them. And often people also are quite happy to have reminders, actually. That's sometimes the request that I've had as well. It's hard, isn't it, because different types of neurodiversity present in different ways, so there's a plurality there, but I think certainly I found laying some offers out and then allowing people to feedback on what they particularly need. It's those individual accommodations, I think, that are important. So do any of the panel have a good citation to use to demonstrate the benefit of EDI to produce better research?
This morning, before coming on the panel, I was having a flick through the article written by Neil and Caroline J and Jeremy Cohen, and I've already forgotten the title, but it came out. It was a conference paper and around inclusion in the RSC world, and it wasn't specifically addressing this issue, but it included a lot of citations on this. Neil just ran out, didn't he? Yeah. Just Jeremy in here. Yeah. That's the one that comes to mind. So follow through on the citations in there.
I have a number of citations actually, so if whoever it is that wants that, they can email me and I can email back some references.
Yeah, I do also have collection of citations. It's very hard to say that here is one citation that will support all of your claims. And we do have a link Slack channel where we can drop some of these references, including the one that Ella you're mentioning specifically for RSC community. But there are a lot of citations beyond RSC communities from government where, the basic idea of not involving full population in the work that would affect them is obviously detrimental. So obviously we know a lot by intuition, but there are a lot of survey data from different government that I generally use in citation when we need to. But yeah, as Anita is saying, we should just collect it somewhere and have full access for everyone.
I think that's interesting because there's quite a lot in research, there's quite a lot in tech, commercial tech, and then the inclusive RSC and other projects are trying to fill that gap where the two come together, the tech in research, and build an evidence base for that. So a question here, I'm curious about how we can make EDI efforts in research software more context aware, especially across diverse cultural and geographic regions. How can we ensure that global EDI strategies remain inclusive without unintentionally alienating contributors from more conservative regions?
There was a workshop yesterday facilitated by Nikki Nicholson and Irene Ramos, where they were specifically discussing this. So there is an intensive document where the notes by, I don't know, 20 people in the room are there. And I think one of the most important thing is ask, don't assume, very similar answer to what Eli was saying. Ask people what they need and not assume that everybody can follow the same norm everywhere. So just to avoid and save time, please do check out the document that is linked. I don't really remember which number it is, but look out, talk to Nikki and Irene.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, these questions about not alienating sort of various populations or regions. And I think it's important to always honor the lived experience of the minoritized groups, understand the historical perspective behind it, understand the cultural, understand the political. We haven't talked much about class within this. We've been bringing that in more and more to the Inclusive RSC research project because we understand that class can be a barrier for people, in a very strong barrier for people in academia, and is likely to play out within our space as well. So it's more understanding the characteristics somebody has that is not enabling them to engage. Maybe rather than thinking about EDI alienating people, I think that's a dangerous, bit of a strong statement. I think that's a dangerous road to go down. I think it's always important to honour lived experience of minoritized people, understand where people's vulnerabilities are, understand the needs that aren't being met.
Can I add to that, Anita? Because I did see that question, and the question is around how do we make sure we don't further push young male allies away because they don't see place for themselves in inclusion in initiatives like Women in HPC, Our Ladies Plus, and so on. Yeah, that question, I think there is a misinformation within that question that these spaces are not for male allies as well. Just because there is a name women or ladies or anything that you don't yourself identify with in the name of that community, the purpose of that community is to elevate those voices. It does not mean that those spaces are actively pushing back against people who are not in the named community. And in order to elevate those voices, we need everybody else in that room. For women to succeed in HPC, we need their colleagues who are non-women as well to be in there, to have our ladies or even Rainbow R. I think we need to engage. We don't need to assume that these communities are actively pushing us away if we don't identify themselves. I think there is a little bit of self-education and self-resistance we need to overcome, because I feel like this is the self-rhetoric that we have accepted, that because I don't see my name in this community, I'm not in there. Take the time to go and engage with those topics, because you are part of society and your involvement is necessary.
I think, thank you, Malvika, for that sort of mature answer to that question. And I think, you know, for me, I identify as one underrepresented group, but not another. And I've certainly been doing a diversity champions program to understand more and be able to come and ally to those groups. And yeah, I think that's a strong answer to think about allyship. Okay. So we have time now for our quick fire ending question. So you've had lots of space to talk now, and this is a different constraint to give a nice succinct question. So thinking about research software and space in the future, what would you wish for those that come after you? This could be something that you had that supported you on your RSC journey, or it could be something you didn't have. What would you wish for those that come after you? Who would like to start?
Definitely more people from my community to find out about RSC at stage early on in their career than I did. I found out about it post MSc. So if I had known that it's something that exists, it's a possible progression path. Yeah, it would have added on to some of the efforts I put in developing my own personal portfolio. So I would very much like to do very aggressive outreach in Kenya and in the regions that BHKI can reach, and go to. I've heard someone say that they teach RSC at an undergraduate level. That does not exist in Kenya, so I would very much like to take that back home and possibly the other regions around that interact with BHKI. Yeah, right.
Thank you.
So something I think I'd like to see is an improvement to events and conferences. Oftentimes you have EDIA content at a conference is one track, and then you'll have at the same time like a technical track focused on like a specific aspect of software engineering or a specific technology. And that means they're in direct competition when, like, I want to do both. And having to constantly choose between doing the EDIA sessions or the EDIA or the community focus sessions and going to a technical talk or a technical workshop, I think again it reinforces that idea that like these are separate things, that you can't do both. And I really appreciate when we have plenary sessions. I've really appreciated that collaborations workshop this year. Like there's so much focus in the plenary sessions on EDIA focused content. And I would like to see more of that. And I would like to see, you know, entire blocks of a conference day that are focused around different types of community focus sessions, rather than community in competition with like technical skill.
Okay.
I would like to see more part-time flexible contracts. I say this because I came into RSE returning from mat leave, and I was very lucky to find a job that was 25%, which was as much as I wanted to work when I had a tiny child. And I see no reason in RSE not to do this. It's a lot of work is kind of being put on a project for a short amount of percentage of FT time. So rather than having 50% contract or an 80% contract and
lots of bits of that, why not just a 25% contract? That works for me coming back from mat leave, but there are various other people with caring responsibilities or who don't want me to work full time, so make it possible for them to do that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Malvika.
Yeah, for me, it's really about mentoring, coaching, training. Always provide mentoring, coaching, training, even if you think you don't have a lot to offer. Your experiences matter. If someone has opened a door for you, keep it open for someone else to enter. Elevate others' voices, because if someone, even if you didn't get it for yourself, you know it's important. So yeah, mentoring, coaching, training will always be my soapbox.
Great. Thank you very much. So thank you everybody for coming to this session, engaging, for your questions. Thank you so much for the panel to, you have your RSC adjacent roles, and yeah, thank you from the community, I think, for investing your time and effort in this and for coming and sharing your experiences with us. It really helps us grow as a community and develop our understanding around these issues. So yeah, just for appreciation for our